Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Sharon and Una, for inviting me to come and speak this afternoon. I feel I'm a little bit of an interloper among archaeologists as an architectural historian, but you'll have to forgive me. So today I'm going to speak to you about a building that's really not very far from here, but I'm not quite sure how familiar people will be with it. The Provost House at Trinity College is a really significant example of Dublin's 18th century domestic architecture. It showcases the skill and ingenuity of native Irish craftsmanship alongside international ideas in architectural design. Locally sourced building materials and finely crafted furnishings and fixtures are found alongside imported examples. And remarkably, this house is one of the few surviving examples of architecture from its period to still fulfill its original function as the home to the Provost or President of Trinity College. The house was built between 1759 and 1761-62, and this was quite a turbulent time in Irish politics and indeed its fiscal state. But it was also a period of increasing power and prosperity for the college, who chose to display this status through a number of very ambitious and quite public building projects. But yet the Provost House was built as a private residence for the then very newly elected Provost, an ambitious barrister named Francis Andrews, using, we believe, public coffers intended for the rebuilding of the West Front at Trinity. And he did this in order to really fulfill his own ambitions on the public or political stage. And the house, which I think we can see here in this view by Malton, the late 18th century, is more of a princely palazzo than a suitable home for a senior academic. And this really points to one of the dualities of this building, being at once very visible, yet largely removed from public access. There's a tension here evident between these boundaries of public and private, of unseen and seen elements. And this is what I'd really like to think about today, to bring us through on a journey as such of the house, focusing on its architectural detail, its material finishes, which are evident in the surviving fabric, but also documented in building accounts in the college archives. And to think a little bit about the relationship between the form and the functionality of its building, and draw out this more nuanced narrative around blurred boundaries. Before I begin properly, though, I would like to thank the Provost of Trinity College, Linda Doyle, for kindly allowing me access to her home and allowing me photograph areas of it to show you today, and of course to Claire Tracy in her office for facilitating this, and also just very briefly to my colleagues on the craft value and stonework projects for some of their input. So the first, and I hope you can see the images with the glare, the first rather striking feature of this building, which we might be familiar with, is its setting, which despite its location in the heart of the city, is rather grandly isolated. Screened by a walled forecourt, it's distinctly separate from the city. Its boundaries marked out very clearly by these high stone walls and gates. Quite different to what the sort of city gates that Margaret was speaking so eloquently about in the last session, but perhaps performing a similar function. The large stone piers of this gateway here are built of Golden Hill granite from the Wicklow Mountains. A very mellow-hued and richly textured stone that had been utilised in Dublin's high-class or high-status buildings from at least the 1720s. There's over 1,700 feet of stonework or granite stonework in these great piers and broad coping, and I quote from the building accounts, at a cost of over £106 for labour alone. And this doesn't take in the labour and skill involved in extracting such large blocks of stone and transporting them from Wicklow, from the quarry side, to the building site here in Dublin. And they certainly, I think, create an imposing effect, particularly the very textured, rustic work to the front. We can hopefully make it out in these photos on the gate piers. Not doing very well. It's deteriorated quite badly in recent years, despite being restored in the 1980s. But we know that there were at least 2 sets of designs made for this gateway, so considerable prestige has been attached, as well as cost, to the creation of this boundary. And as we just saw in the previous image, even depicted in contemporary artworks. But as well as prestige, security would have been a factor, as we were hearing about this morning. Nassau Street, or Patrick's Well Lane, as parts of it were then known, was a really high traffic thoroughfare. And the college itself was not quite as open to the public as it is today. There were several gates, as well as porters' huts or lodges surrounding the perimeter of the college. And we know there was one very nearby, if not attached to the Provost house. Here in 1762, a woman named Anne Boss was paid just over £3 for supplying 2 feather beds to the porters to watch in the Provost's house. So a nighttime watch was a necessity. We can see here also in these images really beautiful, huge scale sycamore trees and cast iron, in this instance, rails. These are later. The rails weren't added until the 1840s initially by John and Robert Mallet, and later extended by Courtney and Stevens. These rails were deemed in the Irish builder to be one of the handsomest stretches of iron grille in Europe. So that's saying something about a bit of ironwork. But they certainly provide a protective, if transparent, barrier between college and city. You also might think a little bit about the relationship of the house to the college itself. I'm showing you here a plan. I think the title is blocked off here of 1761, so just as the Provost house was finishing, and it doesn't quite depict it accurately, but we can see here, here's the Provost house at number 1 Grafton Street, you say isolated from the rest of the historic campus, the old quadrangle here, separated by formal gardens and the stables block here, and the only way even now to reach the Provost house from the college is through a curved corridor, and it's not yet added to this map, but it was built at the same time, which leads into Front Square. This is to say, rather isolated, literally turning its back on the historic campus, and the implications were not lost on contemporaries who complained that the then Provost, by removing himself from the traditional lodgings in the old quadrangle, was aiming to distance himself from the discipline and rigour of college life. If we move beyond the boundary of the outer walls, the house starts to open itself up a little to us. We see here this lofty stone-built façade. Speaks to me of grandeur and ambition. The use of materials marking itself out from the red brick terraces that would have lined the city's streets and squares at that time. Really richly textured and varied in its arrangement. The design of the house, though undocumented, is credited to a man called Henry Keane, an English architect who had been involved in the building of the West Front. The principal facade here, however, of the Provost house was modelled on a much earlier house built on Old Burlington Street in London's Mayfair in the 1720s for another Irish man called General George Wade. And while the designs of the two buildings were extremely close, there are certain elements here in the executed work which don't quite match up. A little thing that annoys me always, and this is the architectural historian in me, the horizontal members of the side wings do not line up with the main block. Just a small thing, but it speaks a little bit of an air of the provincial, if we're allowed to say that. Indeed, at the time, the critic Horace Walpole remarked in 1761 that the Provost House of the university is just finished after a plan of General Wade's, but has lost half of the proportions and symmetry at sea coming over. Now, Walpole is being rather waspish here, but I think we can admit that to take such a borrowed design of 40 years earlier is, on the one hand, quite sophisticated, but somewhat retrogressive in its stylistic references. If we look at the actual building fabric itself, you see the main front is built of Ardbraccan limestone. It's from the White Quarry at Ardbraccan in County Meath. The same stone that was used at Leinster House, or then Kildare House, just over a decade earlier. The masonry work here was carried out by a stone cutter, a very prominent stone cutter named George Darley, and of course his team. And they had worked extensively in Trinity College and beyond over more than a 50-year period. The Darley family, as well as being well-known stonemasons and stonecutters, had quarrying interests in Dublin, in Wicklow, and in County Meath, and they were very likely involved in the supply of the actual building materials here. No conflict of interest at that time. We don't know how much the actual stone cost, but we do know that the workmanship here, just for the entrance front for the stone, cost £586, which is quite considerable for that time. Cost aside, think about the logistical feat to transport these blocks of stone from the White Quarry over water and land, because there's no direct water source between Meath and the city. As I say, a real feat of logistics and engineering in itself. Now, the impact of this stonework of really fine-grained and light grey limestone has diminished somewhat because of the blackening of the stone, particularly on the lower registers of the building. We can't help miss it, even if you don't usually get a sight of this façade. But I still think that the skill of the workmanship is evident in its classical detailing. In the columns and pilasters which surround the central Venetian window, the building accounts tell us they're made from a single block of stone. The moulded architraves around the windows, they cost 32 pence per foot running, and huge amounts carried out across the front of the building. The Doric entablature at the top of the house here. It's got carved with these beautiful little gut-eye mouldings, but the accounts call them bells, tiny little bells and bands in panels. It's a lovely sort of vernacular language coming through the documents as well. Or we hear also about these great rustic piers at the base of the lower elevation, and arches, and we're told they project an extraordinary 17 inches. We'll play. So we can see here that's really heavily textured surface of this unusual icicled rustication. It gives wonderful visual interest, but unfortunately creates the ideal vehicle for gypsum growth. The upper levels of the building, I'll show you back to the facade. We get back. The upper levels, much cleaner, were restored in 1929 and cleaned again in the 1990s. But although test patches were carried out in the lower levels using various cleaning methods at that time, the rusticated stonework is just too problematic, certainly at that time, to attempt to clean. So we're going to skip over that. And the stone is quite friable in places, spalling off, particularly where we have very heavily carved elements and where iron fixtures have come through. But the beauty of the stonework can still be seen, complete with these, you probably won't see the detail here, but these little crinoidal fossil traces in the stone speak of its marine origins. These look, according to the geologist Patrick Wise-Jackson, like thick pencil-like extrusions, and they were known by 18th century masons as screws. They're quite coarse, so the stone around them is quite difficult to work, and that would have made a very smooth ashlar finish quite tricky to achieve, and might account for why they use this really rough, textured, icicle-like treatment at eye level. But while this stonework does present an air of robust grandeur, it is actually only skin deep. Showing you another animation by my colleague Andrew Tierney of this stonework, of the block size. We learn from the accounts and from really digging into the façade that the extraordinary thickness of the piers and the projecting plinths aside, that the rest of this limestone cladding, and that is all it is, would have been no more than 9 to 12 inches deep in most areas. And it was pinned to the back of a brick or a rubble core using iron cramps, joined with leg joggle joints and mortar. So all the unseen elements that are not presented by this façade. Another element, small detail that interests me here, is that the Ardbracken limestone is only used on the main elevation, the main front. It's quite hard to see here, but this is the Ardbracken, and it stops here along this drain pipe. Side elevations and the rear are all built of granite. Cheaper building material, somewhat easier to obtain. The lower levels, the basement or cellarage, are built of even cheaper mountain stone granite, whereas the upper areas that are more visible from the street are built of Golden Hill granite. So this, on the one hand, speaks of practical economy, but also this desire to present this really fine façade to the world. We start to see similar ideas emerge when we move beyond the threshold. In terms of its plan and finish, this Provost house is a really sophisticated example of 18th century domestic architecture. There's a real inventiveness of drama to its scenographic planning, a movement through a series of interconnected spaces, shifting from square to rectangle, octagon to oval, swelling and contracting. It's really, really finely executed. So to a grandeur to its material finishes and its rich decorative detailing, all orchestrated really to create this fine façade, this impression of wealth and good taste. We see this in the series of public rooms, from the entrance hall here with its restrained classical elegance, the first space into which a visitor would step and perhaps linger before gaining admittance. We know from repair work in the 1840s that there was once an antique carved hall table and no less than 10 hall chairs in this small space. And these may have provided an opportunity to pause, admire the surroundings, letting your senses explore really here the contrasting plays of texture, of light and shade from what Christine Casey calls the corrugated surfaces of the wall. And from here in the entrance hall, our movement is really channeled or choreographed through the house, through these double, very high arched screens, through vaulted lobbies beyond, and right the way through with these clear lines of sight from one door to right the way through the house to the back windows and gardens beyond. If you were to take that right-hand arch, you'd end up in the drawing room, a relatively intimate space, perhaps for private or semi-private functions, but still very finely fitted out and furnished. We see here this rich crimson flock wall covering, It's not original, but it does echo the original treatment of this space. And we do again know from inventories and repairs that it would have been quite a densely packed space filled with occasional tables and multiple seats and furnishings. We know in 1794 that a man named Tim McAvoy was paid the substantial sum of £15 for erecting seats in the back parlour and a fancy oak table in ditto. Next door, we have the dining room or eating parlour, and this is quite an early example of a dedicated dining room on the ground floor of a building. Prior to that, it would have tended to have been found on the first floor, certainly within the city's terraced houses, and it's not really a very practical space to have the dining area if we think about where the kitchens are usually placed, down in the basement, and the army of servants that would have to navigate these back spaces to bring food through the house, necessitating an array of different paraphernalia required to keep food hot, drinks cold, so wine coolers, trevettes, and warming dishes. In this space, we have preserved or surviving the 19th century suite of mahogany dining furniture. This material, of course, did not hold such contentious resonance at that point in history. And we have the bill of purchase for this suite of furniture from Lewis and Anthony Morgans of Henry Street in Dublin, dating from 1821. And they describe, among other things, 24 of the very best mahogany parlour chairs with extra size, with deep curved top rails and covered in satin haircloth. A set of Trafalgar dining tables consisting of 7 mahogany tops, finished in the very best manner. A mahogany sarcophagus wine cooler and tea store to match, and these, I don't think we can see them in this picture, but they do survive just behind the table. And also something I haven't found yet, a mahogany deceptive commode made as a boudoir table. So we're looking out for that one. You can also see quite strikingly in this image, the dining room boasts its original carved timber door cases and chimney piece, all executed by a local carver, and gilder, a man called Richard Cranfield. And also most notably here, the very idiosyncratic plaster work by brothers John and Patrick Wall, whose mother, Elizabeth Wall, ran their thriving painting and plastering business following her husband William's death in the 1740s. And we note here, interest are these ropes. You can see suspended on the end walls, and on another wall, which unfortunately I can't show you because it's got a window on it, they're holding up light sconces. Pure fictive illusionism. They're not anything structural, very unusual detailing, but it points to some of the illusionism that we start to see in this space. This show of grandeur continues in the grand staircase itself, with its articulated wall surfaces, fine plasterwork again by the walls, offset by rich oil paintings, stone statuary, and brass light fixtures. And of course, the piece de resistance, the exquisite wrought iron balustrade by the ironmonger Timothy Turner, and I get stuck on that one, which winds itself tightly around 6 sides of this octagonal space. You can see here the 49 individual panels of ironwork that were hand-wrought and set in place by Turner, each at a cost of 18 shillings and 6 pence, or overall £45, which, to give you a sense of its value, was roughly the annual salary of the college bursar at that time. 19th century inventories show that the stair was covered in a bordered Venetian carpet, and the staircase windows hung with a curtain of crimson moreen drapery. So you really can get a sense of the splendour of this 18th century space at a time when taste was king, and increasing importance was put on entertaining, on hospitable display, as a means of self-fashioning and promoting oneself on both the public and private stages. And the grand staircase really becomes the focal point in these homes as places of parade, and can give us insights into the use and articulation of space, and indeed investment in different areas of the house. Showing you here a plan of the first floor of the building, and you can see here these are really the only two practical spaces. These are the master bedrooms for the Provost. Staircase, circulation lobby, another staircase, big saloon. So not a hugely practical arrangement of space. The services are relegated to the wings and the cellars, and private quarters shunted to the rear. And say the master bedrooms mainly up in the attic area with this beautiful top-lit lobby above. So what of the other areas of the house? The service areas, which we really know little about how they were originally finished, as I say, are relegated to the wings in this place. We do know that they say fragmentary evidence of their original finish survives, and we do know that they were furnished in quite a rudimentary manner. For example, there were 5 black stone chimney pieces in the cellars and servants' apartments, and these in total cost less than half of the Portland stone chimney piece in the entrance hall. We also get a sense of the hierarchy even in these spaces and the interplay between economy and display. The floors of the cellar and offices were covered in relatively cheap black stone flags, while the butler's pantry was, and he would have been a more high status individual, were covered in Swedish flagstones from the island of Åland. You can see here, you can make it out, black painted trim at skirting level, and this was a very practical solution for high traffic spaces, and I'm showing it to you here because we're going to see another example in a moment. If we move upwards slightly out of the basement, we see a more subtle shift again, a slight blurring of this strict delineation between utility and show. Note the shaped granite stairs at the threshold, and then 2 supporting columns here. They're actually Portland stone, but painted in this instance. And then moving up to the service stair, serves all the full height of the building, and for me really illustrates these blurred boundaries between public and private space. Built of Portland stone, shaped wrought iron balustrade. It's a really exquisite space, an oval staircase used by servants and family alike. And if you note here how the base of the rails is shaped to allow the space for ladies' skirts. The use of stone here, it could be argued, served a practical function as a fire retardant, but this is Portland stone. It's a hugely expensive building material, and that and the finesse of the craftsmanship here, and the cost of it at almost £200, I think really gives us a sense, whether it's granular detail or not, of the skill and the labour involved, but also the degree of investment in these utilitarian spaces. I'm going to move very quickly now. I want to return to this pared back elegance of the entrance hall. The finely finished surface layer here, Portland stone, diamond flagging to the floor, a moulded Portland stone chimney piece, the Doric plasterwork detailing emphasizing its lofty proportions, or this chiaroscuro effect of this corrugated wall surface. But if we scratch a little bit below the surface, we see again this black stone trim, for example. It's actually just painted black in places, and it's used, to serve a very practical function to avoid scuffing, but in this really high status area. The rusticated walls, which is a very unusual treatment in an interior, made to look like stone, but it's actually painted timber. A cheaper option, but gives a very convincing effect. Similarly, with the chimney piece, it is real stone, it's Portland stone, and it cost over £9 to, just for the workmanship. But if we look closely at it, you can start to see the underlying economy. A series of very shallow, small blocks of stone, probably no more than 2 or 3 inches thick, cut and pieced together in a way that maximized the material and reduced waste of this expensive stone. Highly skilled work, but also part of a conscious conceit, an illusionism of 18th century craftsmanship, and I'll finish on this point. Here we're looking at the saloon, one of the finest surviving mid-18th century interiors in the city, if not the country, where the outer show of surface grandeur really reaches its pinnacle. Twin marble chimney pieces, carved timber door cases, the outer side is 5 articulated sash windows, gilded Corinthian columns, marking shifts in scale and function in this space. And then also portraits of the college founders and patrons. So on the surface, this was a really remarkable space. The plasterwork is what I really want to finish on, though. Again, this is another example by the Wall brothers, pardon the pun. They carried out the work on the walls and ceiling here, and it's a really exceptional example of the so-called work of the Dublin Plaster School of Plasterwork. And here we see this juxtaposition of really beefy coffers in the coved ceiling. Gave the game away. Static, ornate floral bosses, contrasting wonderfully with a sort of quite fluid frieze below, a riot, if we can call it that, of scrolling acanthus leaf, of floral baskets, and birds in a myriad of poses. Really, really accomplished example of plasterwork, but an illusion in a sense. This coffered ceiling at the center of the room is that it gives off the impression of a solid classical vault, but actually we're looking at something much more rudimentary. Our view from below is of the finished layer of a 3-coated lime plaster surface, modelled and enriched by hand, and extremely accomplished, but this is the inner side of the superstructure. So if we're looking from bird's eye view from above, standing in the attic, we can see that the plasterwork is fixed onto a superstructure of wooden lats, nailed to a timber framework, which is partially supported by the roof structures, but also sitting on the brick walls or the outer walls of the house. Structural illusionism that combined the skills of plasterer, carpenter, and architect in the creation of this superstructure, in the calculation of the weight that all of the combined materials would have created in order to hang it structurally and create this fictive illusionism from below. And as I say, we can see here another view of it in a digital model, and the remnants here of the rough plaster key that would have been applied to these timber lats, also using animal hair as an added adhesive product. And to this substructure, then the plasterers would have come and applied their finely finished layer of lime plaster. So to say, highly accomplished, fictive illusionism that for me quite clearly demonstrates this boundary between fine finished surface and what lies beneath. These blurred boundaries of outer show and the inner private view of these worlds, and this more nuanced picture of pragmatic economy and illusionism in 18th century architecture. Thank you. Sorry to go over.